So you start off the game at home on your island, and then your dad calls you over to learn how to do some farming. And then I selected my first spirit before getting into my very first fight, and then I headed off to another island to do my training for a year. And I ended up crashing my broom, which was pretty embarrassing, and I wandered around until I passed out. Your day starts out meeting Asano, who runs the inn. After passing out the night before, she brought you inside, and she invites you to come downstairs, and that's where she gives you your first quest and gives you a recipe for a selling crate. And then you get a recipe from your mom via a letter on how to craft a balloon, since you broke the broom. And then I start work on placing my alchemist tent, which I have to clear the field before I can do that. So right after I craft my tent, I decide to go ahead and craft the selling crate so I can sell that stone for Asano. And so I sold that stone, and then I went ahead and met Ophelia real quick, and then went back to gathering some resources, and I spent most of the day doing that, and then I decided to go ahead and end the day. So I started out day 3 getting my very first newsletter from Asano, and as well as a quest to befriend some of the other neighbors. And then I realized that I did not get all of the stones sold for the quest for Asano, so I went ahead and sold some more stone. After I sold the rest of the stone for Asano, I went ahead and started meeting some of the other villagers in the town, and went ahead and updated the nickname for my spirit, nicknamed him Pudding. And then I spoke with Asano again, and she let me know to go and check out a dungeon, and then I continued on socializing with some of the other villagers, and then got some more quests that I needed to complete, and got to see Guyana, which is always super fun. And then I found the warp whistle, which will let me teleport from other islands back to Moonstone Island once a day. And then I spent the majority of the day farming for resources, found my first mine of the game, and stayed there until I ran out of energy. And then I got some much needed farming done, and then I went ahead and ended the day. So I started off day 4 just getting some farming done. Then I went ahead and started farming for some resources so that I can craft the balloon for the quest I have. And then I headed on over to my first island. It's a water island, and I captured a few spirits. I also unlocked my first talisman, and then I came across my first boss fight against a sand crashy, and it was so long it took me ages to finish that. A painful boss fight. I went ahead and leveled up my spirits, and then renamed my Plant to Custard, and then I caught a new spirit, an octopup that I nicknamed Vanilla, and I grinded for a little bit more, and then I decided to go home, and I met Cleo, and then I ended the day. So day 5 ended up being our very first day of rain, and then I decided to go ahead and spend this time getting some mining done. And while I was in the mines, I came across a couple of different spirits I hadn't seen before, so I went ahead and caught them, and found my first chests, and got some new crafting recipes. And then I went and visited Zed to go and turn in my spirit research, and then turned in some stuff to the blacksmith so that I could get my furnace recipe. A bit later on in the evening, I went ahead and decided to go on over to the inn, because a lot of the townsfolk will go and gather there on Friday nights. And then after I talked to everybody, I tried to go over to the local water island. It didn't go well, and I ended up falling. So I just went ahead and decided to go ahead and end the day because it left me with like 18 energy. So I woke up the next day and got a letter from Zed asking me to come by the research center so I could get some more tasks regarding spirits. And I just got some quick farming done, by watering my crops. And then I went to a mailbox and got some crafting recipes for a spirit barn. And then I did some more exploring and found this cool area. It's got a really pretty overview of the island. And then I got some more foraging done before I decided to go on over and harass the botanists. And then I went and said hi to Cleo before heading back over to the water island again. And I just did some foraging, and then I also did some grinding. I really need to get my spirits leveled up, and then I decided to head on back to Moonstone Island, and then I ended the day. So I got a letter from Zed on the start of day 7, reminding me to build a barn so that I can get resources to give to him. And then I went about my day, getting some farming done, as per the usual, just watering the little crops I have at this point. And then I did my daily routine of going to bother the botanists. And then there's Guyana, my baby. And then I decided I wanted to start clearing an area for a furnace, because I still need to get that made so I can complete that quest for the blacksmith. So I just spent a little time getting that all cleared up before I got to place it. And then I went ahead and placed some of the ore I needed to be made into the furnace so that I could go ahead and work on the next steps for that quest, which is to sell some of the Ingo to her. And then since I had some leftover wood, I decided to start making some bridges for that water island so that I can connect the various parts that you have to have connected via a bridge in order to explore. And so I just spent a decent chunk of my time cutting down some trees. And then I decided to go ahead and head on over to the water island so I could start placing some of those bridges. And not long after I started placing the bridges, I came across this boss sand crashy, which took me so long to fight. Explains why I really need to just be having a day where I'm just focusing on grinding and not resource farming, but you know, to each their own. I really just, as soon as I get all of the bridges made, I knew I wanted to just focus on grinding, but I really needed to get that all squared away before I could continue. I think, in all honesty, this fight probably took me like 10 minutes because it had so much stamina and it kept on using its regen abilities. So it took way too long to finish that up, but I was very excited when I did. And then a decent chunk of this day was also just running along the edges of the islands to make sure that I've got that map all showing that it's explored. So when I look at the map, it shows that, hey, everything, you can view everything that's on that island. And then as I was starting around, I finally had the Magic Man's chicken hut show up. And then I talked to him for a little bit, and he asked me to go ahead and find his shattered memories in various dungeons. And then I went ahead and bought a card from the shop before heading on out to place some more bridges. Honestly, the placing the bridges took a lot longer than I thought it would, just because of the amount of resources that it takes to build bridges. And then, as my luck would have it, I came across yet another boss fight with a Claudio. This one, luckily, didn't take as long. He only had 57 health. Otherwise, I think I might have actually screamed. And then I went on back to placing some more bridges until the wee hours of the night. And then I found the moonstone on this island, and then I decided to warp on home, but not before grabbing my Ingo that had finished manufacturing while I was off on my carpeting journey with all of those bridges. And then I decided to head on back to the house and end my day. So day 8 began, and I decided to do some quick farming. Just water the crops as per the usual. Then I headed on over to the blacksmith to sell the ingo so that I could get my recipe for crafting an anvil. And then I went back over to the mine on Moonstone Island to go ahead and try and get some more iron ore so that I could make some more iron ingo so that I can get that crafted, since the anvil is really useful for making a variety of charms for other islands. And then I went on over to the hot springs to try and heal up, and then said hi to Cleo before heading on over to the botanist. Ophelia, got to talk to her for a little bit, and of course Guyana. And since I was all healed up from that very lengthy hot spring visit, I decided to head on over to the water island to continue on with the building bridges and grinding my spirits a bit. And then immediately when I got there, I found a fish bow, so I caught that guy. And then, unfortunately, with continuing the string of luck from the last day, I encountered another difficult boss fight with an elephant. And then after I finished that fight, I just was farming for some more resources and continued placing the bridges. And I continued doing that for a while, until I ran out of energy, and then I just placed the remainder of those bridges that I had farmed resources for, and then I went back to the island and went to bed and ended the day. So I started day 9 by just finally getting my crops harvested. And then I said hi to Paulo and went on over to the general store to get some more seeds, since I just harvested the rest of my crops. And then I went ahead and said hi to Guyana as per the usual, and then went ahead with planting my seeds that I had just purchased from the store, as well as hoeing some more places for crops. And then I headed back on over to the mines, and I found the last of the crafting recipe for that mine, and then found my way in this area that didn't have a way back over the water, so I created a small bridge. And then I decided to head on over back to the water island and continued the grind of placing bridges, which went on for a while. And then I went back to farm some more resources before starting to search for the mine on the water island. And I found it pretty quickly, actually, which was pretty surprising. And then I came across my first chest in that mine and got a Moonstone Enchanter recipe. And then I continued with exploring the mines. And then I came across this little guy. It's a torble, and I thought it was super cute, so I went ahead and captured that spirit. It's like sort of like a turtle, like hiding in its shell, and I thought it was super cute. And then I sent it on over to the science center, and then I decided to go ahead and end the day. So I started day 10, just getting some quick farming done to water the crops that I had planted the day prior. Then I noticed that there was a letter I hadn't read yet, and it just was Rowan saying that there's a community chest in the general store now. Then I checked over what I need for my Moonstone Enchanter and saw I needed some Go, so I went ahead and added some iron ore into my furnace. And then I decided to head on over to the mine to get some more work done in there. And then I went and talked to Ophelia and Guyana. And then I just touched the statue and it gave like this weird glowing effect. And then I headed back on over to the water island to get some more exploration done over there. And then I decided to go back on into the mines since there was one remaining chest. and I got a crafting recipe for a calendar, and then I was kind of low on energy, so I just headed back on over to Moonstone Island, and then I crafted my anvil, and then I decided to go ahead and end the day. So day 11 started out with me just getting some quick farming done by watering my crops, and then straightening up the plots so they look a little more uniform. I did that by using my hammer to clear those up, and then I grabbed some fiber by using my scythe so I could make my calendar, and then I said hi to Guyana real quick before grabbing a gemstone from the statue and making a quick purchase at Paolo's and selling some items at the blacksmith. And then I went on over to the water island to continue mining away. And then after I had mined for a bit, I decided to go ahead and grind some fights to try and level up my spirits a bit more. And then I decided to go ahead and head back to the island, place the portrait that I had purchased, and then go searching for a moonstone, which I found a lot quicker than I thought I would, and then I decided to end the day. So day 12 ended up being yet another rainy day. Got a letter from our father letting us know about moonstones, which seemed a little bit late in the game considering we've already found several. And then I started putting some of my moonstones in the furnace so that I could get some moonstone and go, and then talk to Guyana and Ophelia before heading on over to the blacksmith. Wanted to go over to the blacksmith to check on the resources I would need to upgrade my scythe, and since I was in the area, I went over to the general store to go ahead and check out that community chest I received that letter about. And then I went ahead and said hi to Quill, since I'm always forgetting to talk to him. And then I went on over to the research center, talked to Zed, where he asked me to catch him a psychic spirit. Not long after I talked to Zed, I had a rare Cleo sighting, so I decided to say hi to her before heading on over to Tobin's shop to buy a fishing rod. I finally decided to go ahead and explore a different island. I found a moonstone pretty quickly, and then came across my first spring temple. I ran into the magic man. He explained how the temples work, and I gave an offering of a stone fruit and a cat tail to them, and then started exploring. I then came across my first boss fight, a lawn log. Took a little bit, but finally beat him, and then I won an alchemist's wand, which you need to progress in the temple. And then looked at the next offering, which I need copper and iron ingo for. And because I didn't have the ingo needed, I decided to do some more island exploration and found another moonstone, and then tried to grind my spirits and caught a new spirit, a papoose, which looks like a dandelion. And then I crafted some bridges, as well as I caught an oaken spirit. And then I said hi to the magic man again, and then I headed back to Moonstone Island and ended my day. So day 13 starts off, and I got another letter letting me know that the town is wanting various spirits to be provided to them. So I have to go and find the spirits that they're requesting and give them to the townsfolk. And didn't do anything with that, and just decided to get started with my farming for the day. And then my some of my ingo were all crafted, so I went ahead and added some iron ore into my furnace before I went over to say hi to Ophelia and Guyana. And then I decided to ask Guyana out on a date, which she said yes, surprisingly. And then I decided to do some more island exploration today, and I activated the talisman and decided to do a meditate to upgrade one of my cards, because honestly I have way too many cards in my deck at this point. And then I came across a hop straw, which I decided to catch, and then I went on over to another island. And this island had a bit more difficult spirits, so I struggled a bit more with this particular fight with these guys. Yeah, it was not a super great fight. But after about 8 million years, I finally beat them. And then I decided to head on back to the island, went over to Paulo's shop to look at what some of the upgrades cost. And then I got a random crafting recipe. And then I decided to take a crack at the fishing in this game. Caught a few fish, which was good. Minigame's just gonna take some getting used to at this point. And then I checked on my Ingo in the furnace, and then I went ahead and went back on over to the Spring Temple to turn in the Ingo that I had made. And then I turned those in, and then I got to use the Alchemist's Wand for the first time and to get those vines to grow so I can get to the second platform. And then when I got to the second platform, I came across the second Lawn Log boss. This one was drastically more difficult. It had so many shields that it took so many of the bash skills in order to even get to doing any real damage to the HP. Like 8 shields was what I was dealing with, and then 150 HP, so it just took me a really long time to finish this fight. And I was so relieved when I did, and then I got a chest with some gems and got some ladder plant seeds. And then it wanted some clay and a moonstone, but in order to get clay, I need a spirit barn. So I decided to go ahead and head back on over to Moonstone Island. But before I headed back on over to the house, I just checked on some of my silver ore in the furnace, and then I headed back into the house. So day 14 starts out, and I got a new letter from Paulo asking me to find him his first spirit. And then I decided to go ahead and just get some quick farming done. Just decided to water my crops that I've got going on, since they're not quite yet ready to harvest. And then I had a few iron ore I had put into the furnace, so I went to go and grab the Ingo that finished up overnight. And then I went on over to go and say hi to Guyana, which went really poorly, which had me a little nervous for the date that we were gonna have later that night. And then I decided I wanted to go on over to another island. So I headed for the water island so that I could travel to the island nearest to that island once I go over that furthest bridge I had made a few days prior. But before that, I decided I wanted to get some resource farming done. So I spent a while doing that and grinding up my spirits. At this point, I was at a pretty awkward point where my monsters were a little too powerful for the island I've been working on, but not quite powerful enough for the other islands, so it's going to take a while to get them up to the levels I want them at. So needless to say, the fights didn't last very long, and then after that last fight I ended up coming across Snorko, which is a spirit that has like a scuba diving mask, as in he's like snorkeling, so I decided to go ahead and catch him. Took a couple attempts, but I finally got it, and then I sent him on over to the science center. Then I came across a Ella plant, which was a higher level than most of the other spirits I had come across, so decided to fight that one as well. Didn't take me too long to finish that up, and then I finally decided to go ahead and head on over to another island. This island ended up being my very first electric type island that I was exploring, and the electric islands, if you're on there for too long, it will give you an electric shock, once the yellow bar fills up. So you really want to get what you need pretty quickly off of this island so you're not taking too much damage, or at least make sure you have a lot of food. And this is also one of the islands with the seeds that I need for that quest for Guyana. Unfortunately, I did not have a powerful enough scythe to do that, so I knew I needed to go back and get that upgraded before I returned. And then I came across a spirit, and I know you can make charms with the electric spirits drops in the barn, so I wanted to catch one, and I caught this like snake looking guy, and then I went ahead and tried to defeat the boss that came along with that guy. This was the first fight where I came across a boss and another spirit together, so that was interesting. Didn't take terribly long though, which was good. And then I found my first teleport point, which that teleport point took me to an Earth Island, and I was able to get another talisman. I went ahead and got another meditate talisman, just because I have so many cards at this point. And then I continued my resource farming to build some bridges, because the area I was on was separated by a body of water, and you couldn't explore the rest of the island without making a bridge. And then I came across a few low-level spirits, so I went ahead and fought them for the XP. And then I found my first the moonstone on this island, and then I fought some more monsters, and then I came across this little sack which ended up having a crafting recipe for a mailbox, which I was super excited for, which means I can just place that outside of my house instead of having to check the conservatory's mailbox. And then I went and said hi to the magic man, and then headed back on over to Moonstone Island to make it in time for my date with Guyana. It was pretty an entertaining date. She kind of just poked fun at the fact that we don't ever say anything. And then after the date, because it was so late at night, the game day ended. So day 15 started out, ended up being a bit of a rainy day, and my crops finally finished growing, so I got to harvest them. And then I went on over to the mailbox and got a letter from our mother complaining about how quiet it is in the house and that they were going to go into the city. And then I noticed that my iron ingot had finished manufacturing, so I went ahead and put some copper ore into the furnace so that I could get some copper ingot as well. And then I decided to go visit Paulo at his shop, and then I picked up another one of the random crafting recipes, which I ended up getting a stone path, which I'll be able to make use of, knowing my decor obsessed self. And then I went ahead and I grabbed some wood and stone so that I could begin working on getting that upgrade, that first major upgrade for the house. So we no longer look like a little itty-bitty tent. And I didn't quite have enough wood, so I went ahead and was farming for some more resources before I headed on back to Paulo's to have him get started on that order. But before I went on back to Paulo's, I decided to go visit Ophelia in Guyana, and I was really happy to see that our chat was actually up to 80% success now, which was a relief because it's been not at that high for a while. And now I went and saw Paulo for that upgrade. I was honestly surprised it wasn't more expensive. 2,500 gold was not a whole lot to pay for that. And honestly, it didn't require that much materials either, which was a bit of a shock. And then I went on over to the blacksmith, decided to talk to Farah while I was over there, mostly because I wanted to see what I needed for the reinforced scythe, because I really want to get that upgraded so I can work on getting the seeds I need for my, the seeds I need for my quest for Guyana. Don't know if I'll get that done though. at least this year. Then I decided to do some more farming for some resources so I could go ahead and craft my own mailbox so I could stop going on over to the conservatory every time I wanted to check my mail. And then one of my ingo was ready to grab, so I went and grabbed that from the furnace and then put some more ore into the furnace to make some more ingo. And then back to farming for more resources I went, because I knew that I had more upgrades that I was going to need in the future. Even though my priority is the reinforced scythe, I knew that I was going to need to do more upgrades for the house, and building up my wood reserve was pretty necessary at this point. And then I went ahead and I crafted my Moonstone Enchanter, since I did need that for a quest as well. And I decided to go ahead and place it into my house because I didn't really want to waste floor space. I wasn't really in a position to craft anything else, so I just decided to leave it as is. It's kind of a catch-22 because I really want to craft a glider. I knew that from the get-go, but that takes a lot of moonstones in order to do that. I believe it takes 9 to be able to craft the sheets you need to get that crafted, so it's kind of a difficult thing. And then I spotted Cleo, which is always a rare sighting, so I decided to go ahead and say hi to her. And then, since I had enough materials, I decided to go ahead and make a decoration station. I didn't see anything I wanted to make, but, you know, at least I've got that crafted, so I'll be able to make it as soon as I get a recipe that I find interesting that I want to place in my house, or just out on the farm. And then I put some more ore into the furnace, and then I decided to go ahead and end the day, because there wasn't really anything else I wanted to get done. So day 16 started out, and the new house upgrade was all finished up, so I went ahead and just took a quick look-see around before I headed outside. And then I got yet another letter in the mail from Asono, and she gave me a cookbook and some recipes for making a stove. So I got that, decided not to do anything with that at that point, and then collected my copper ingo from the furnace. And then I went ahead and said hi to Asono while I was in the town, because I don't usually talk to her. And then I ran into Guyana. Obviously had to say hi to her. And then I decided I wanted to do some more island exploration. So I got my balloon out, and as I was about to go to a different island, I noticed that the temple was in the direction I was going, so I decided to postpone going to another island and give this dungeon a try, which was a little interesting to say the least. And then I got a new crafting recipe for a stone fence. And then I went ahead and I found my first of the guardians that I got to fight. Luckily this was not a super intense fight. I just had a really unfortunate occurrence of really bad hands with this fight. Didn't get really powerful cards, so it took a little bit longer than I would have liked. But in comparison to the Spring Temple, it was drastically easier than that. And when I defeated the Guardian, I got a memory shard, which, if you remember, is supposed to be there for the Magic Man because he lost his memories. And then I got another crafting recipe for a floor mattress. And then I found my very first of the Ando trees. And what this does is whenever you find them, it actually will give you more stamina. And then at that point I left the dungeon, and after 8 million years I finally made my way over to another island. I picked up some resources, but I didn't end up staying on this island for too terribly long. And me not staying on this island for terribly long had a lot to do with how low level all of the spirits were. Just didn't seem like a great use of my time to spend it over there. But I did find this little guy I hadn't seen before, a cool slime, so I did tame that one. And then I sent it on over to the Science Center, since I still have not managed to make a barn. And then I went ahead and tamed a papoose as well. And then I decided to head on off of that island to see if there was anything else in the near vicinity. It's a little tricky for me to see because that island, you couldn't see the shadows of any neighboring islands. So I just sort of decided to take a gamble on that one. And luckily there was. This one ended up being another water island, but unfortunately it had like a really tall ledge, so I couldn't really explore any further without any ladder seeds planted. So I moved along to try and get to another island before heading back home, and at this point it was very, very late. And I came across another electric type island. However, when I got there, I got an alert saying that the spirits on this level are a much higher level than mine. So at that point, I decided to go ahead and head on back to the farm. And then I decided to go ahead and end the day. Okay, so today I just started day 17. And first off, I got a letter from Tobin, just letting me know that he has some fishing stuff for sale. And then I was just putting some stuff away into my storage. And then I saw Paulo, so I just decided to go ahead and say hi, since I always forget to talk to him. And it went very poorly. And then I went ahead and grabbed my copper ingot. And then I went ahead and took that over to the blacksmith's. And then I went ahead and got that upgrade and decided against getting anything else upgraded. And then I went ahead and checked out the community chest and picked up some growth fertilizer. And then I went to deposit more of that into my chest. And then I decided to go ahead and head on over to another island so that I could get some grinding done with my spirits, as per the usual. Then when I got to the islands, I remembered with my reinforced scythe, I could go ahead and get those plants I needed to sell to Guyana for that quest. So I went ahead and decided to do that instead. And I collected some bolt seeds and then did some resource farming while I was over there. And then I did fight this spirit, and there was an arm bot there, which I didn't have, so I decided to catch that guy. Kind of funky looking, but it'll be of use to me. However, it took a really painfully long time to actually catch him. And then I went back to fighting the gnomes after I had captured the last spirit, and it was not going super great. And then I finally beat that fight, so I decided to teleport back to the farm. And then I went on over to the conservatory to sell them the seeds. But not before saying hi to Ophelia and Guyana. And then I decided, since it was pretty early in the day, that I was going to get some fishing done. And I pretty much did that for the remainder of my day. And then after I spent a huge chunk of my time getting some fishing done, I went ahead and headed back on over to the house to go ahead and end the day. And then once I got to the house, I realized I should probably sell my fish. Otherwise, I kind of just wasted all of that time and energy that I spent fishing for all of those items. And then after I sold the fish, I went back inside and ended the game day. So day 18 started with a letter from Zed explaining that there was going to be an upcoming festival at the end of spring. And then I went ahead and headed on over to the other island so that I can work on doing some resource farming as well as grinding my spirits because I really want to get those levels up. And then after my first fight, I found the magic man's hut, and so I went ahead and gave him the memory shard I had found in that dungeon. And then I talked to him a little bit before I headed back on out to do some more grinding. And then I decided to go ahead and head back, and I went ahead and said hi to Guyana. And then I tried to ask her out on a date to the tavern, and she very abruptly turned me down. And then after that, I decided to do some more fishing. And so I did that for a few more in-game hours. And then after I caught a few fish, I headed back on over to the house and ended the day. So we started off day 19. Went ahead and said hi to Paolo, and a few of the other residents of the town. Like I got to see Rowan, which I always forget to say hi to him, and then Farah and Ostino as well. And then I went on over into the general store to pick up some more seeds, and then I decided to redo my farming area, so I knocked out the plots I had by my house and then went ahead and made some new plots over the bridge. And then I went ahead and started planting all of my seeds. And then after I finished watering all my crops, I went on over to another island with the intention of getting some grinding done. So I fought a couple of spirits, and then I realized that I couldn't actually see where the next island was from the island I was on, so I decided to do some resource farming. And I actually ended up finding the mine this way for that island. And then I did that until I ran out of energy, and then I went ahead and headed on back home. So day 20 starts out, and I immediately headed over to the other island and started placing some bridges I had crafted the other night, and then continued on with my resource farming because I still could not see the edge of the next island. So was cutting down a bunch of trees, and then the magic man showed up, so obviously I had to go and say hi to him, and he was trying to figure out how to communicate with Fishbow. And then I did some more resource farming, and then I ran out of energy, so I headed on back home. So day 21 starts out, it's raining again, and then I got a letter from Tobin asking me to find him a spirit, which I ignored like the others before heading on over to do some more resource farming to continue building that bridge. And then eventually I ran out of energy, and I headed back home to end the day. So day 22 ended up being another rainy day, and I got a letter telling me not to farm for resources in the town, even though I didn't. And then I went ahead and started resource farming on Moonstone Island instead of going to another island. And I did that until I ran lowish on energy and decided it was kind of a waste for me to head on over to another island to go and place bridges when I was that low on energy, so I just went ahead and ended the day. So day 23 continues with the island being covered in a perpetual state of rain, and then I finally went back over to the island and placed the bridges, and came across the next neighboring island, which ended up being an electric island, and I ended up gathering some seeds. And then I came across this really cute electric spirit called Barkbite, so I went ahead and captured it. But that fight had a lot of really overpowerful spirits, so I decided to leave before I got my ass handed to me. And then I decided to teleport off the island so I couldn't be chased by those spirits. And then I went and sold the seeds to the conservatory. And then I went ahead and decided to finally get started on that cookbook recipe quest I had from Asono. So I went ahead and continue with that and did some more decorating around the house, and realized I didn't have enough ore for the stove, so I went ahead and put some iron ore into the furnace, and then I decided to go ahead and end the day. So day 24 starts out, and I just go ahead and start watering my crops. And then I pick up those ingos I had started before bed, and then I crafted the stove for that quest and continued on with some redecorating. And then went on to another island and said hi to the magic man. And then, because I was finally done with my resource farming, I went ahead and continued on with some grinding for a few hours, and then I headed back home and saw that there was a seed at the statue, so I grabbed that and sold it to the conservatory before crafting the broom for that quest, and then I went ahead and ended the day. So before I get too far into what happened on this game day, I realized that OBS did something weird when I was recording this, so I'm sorry in advance because it looks super awkward with how it cut. I tried to zoom in, but this is as good as I could get it to work. And it started where I got a letter from Cleo telling me she wants to talk to me, and then I started grinding, and before I went into the mines, to do some resource farming so I can upgrade some more of my tools, and then, as it usually goes in the mines, I came across some spirits, so I was able to continue my grinding while I was doing my resource farming. And then I found the chest in that mine before I got attacked by some spirits, so I beat them, and then I headed back on home to end the day. So day 26 started out, and I went on over to say hi to Guyana, and then I decided to ask her out on the tavern date, and this time she said yes. And then I went ahead and said hi to Ophelia since she was right next to her. And then I went ahead and started taking care of my crops and harvesting some of the crops that finished up before heading on over to another island. And immediately upon getting to that island, I found the magic man, so I went and said hi to him before I continued on with some grinding of my spirits. And then after a while, they ran low on energy, so I headed back to the island. And then I said hi to Cleo and Paolo and headed on over to the tavern since it was Friday. And then I just did some resource grinding before I ended the day. So day 27 started out, and I just said hello to Paolo before heading off to another island and just doing some resource farming. After I went at that for a while, I built another small bridge against a body of water and then started grinding for the day before getting some progress in the mines, and then I decided to go ahead and head back and just continue socializing until it was time for the date with Guyana at the end of the night. And then I also decided to harvest my crops and then sell some of those crops. I went into the general store and saw there was something in the community chest, so I grabbed that before continuing on to say hi to some more of the townsfolk. I ended up building another bridge, and then pretty much just kept on resource farming until it was time for the date, which was actually super cute and super sweet, but it was pretty short, and then the day ended. So we finally hit the last day of spring and got a letter from Waldo, the magic man, asking me to find him a friend that looks like Fishbow. And then I went ahead and said hi to Ophelia, and Guyana, of course, and we finally hit our second heart with her. And I went ahead and headed on over to the neighboring island, and then I ran into Waldo and decided to go ahead and say hi to him real quick before trying to make some progress in the mines. And then I went ahead and headed back to Moonstone Island and said hi to Cleo before placing a bridge and grabbing a talisman, the last one on the island. And then I went over to the furnace and collected some ingo, and then I went ahead and ended the day. So day 29 started out as the first day of summer, and I got a letter from our mom and they gave us our first concoction quest. So I made note of that, and then I went ahead and grabbed my concoction from my storage chest, and then was checking out my cooking station. And then I went ahead and sold my concoction to complete the next portion of the quest. Then I went ahead and said hi to Quill real quick, and then headed back on in to the general store, said hi to Rowan before picking up some more seeds. And then I went on over to say hi to Ophelia and Guyana, and I got a new quest for the summer seeds that they need. I was happy to see that we were at a 90% success rate. And then I headed back on over to the house and crafted some items at the prep station before going ahead to farms to plant some of my seeds. And then I went ahead and started watering the crops that were not planted in the river. And then I went ahead and started getting some foraging done for some of the new crops that just popped up in the new season. And then headed on over to another island and got another cleanse talisman before continuing on with trying to grind. And I stayed at this island for quite some time and then ended up finding the moonstone for that season, and then headed back on over to the island and got another talisman, and then decided to go ahead and end the day. So day 30 started off and I got a letter from my mom after I sent over that concoction to her. And then I spotted Guyana, so I went and said hi to her real quick. And then I grabbed some ingo that I had put into the furnace and put some moonstones so I could smelt those as well. Before going ahead and saying hi to some of the townsfolk. And then the statue had one of the seeds I needed for my summer seed quest, so I went and turned that in, and then continued on with trying to train up my spirits. And then after a while I ran into the magic man, so I went and said hi to him, and then did one more fight, and then decided to go ahead and head back. And then my ingo, my moonstone bar had finished smelting, and then I just collected some wood so that I could make my spirit barn. And then I also made some of the spirit stalls as well, and then I decided to go ahead and end the day. So day 31 starts out, and I just went ahead and got started watering my crops, and then started farming for resources so I could build some more spirit stalls. And then I started working on clearing the area I wanted to place my barn. And then I went ahead and started placing the stalls and putting some feed inside. And then I headed on over to pick up some of my spirits that were in storage, and then said hi to Cleo before grabbing the spirit that Paulo wanted. And then while I was there, I went ahead and picked up a random crafting recipe, and then crafted a spirit nest and placed that into the barn as well. By the time I was done, it was pretty late in the day, so I went ahead and just ended. So day 32 started out, and I just was watering my crops, and then I spotted Ophelia, so I went over to say hi. And then went and visited with Guyana before heading on over to feed my spirits. And then I got some clay, so I put that in the spring dungeon, and still needed a moonstone, so then I just headed on over to another island to continue training my spirits for a while, and then when they ran low on energy, I headed back home and did some fishing. So I sold the fish and then picked up some ingo I put into the furnace, and then I decided to end the day. So day 33 started out, and I noticed I had a letter in the mail, and Asano wanted me to try her questionable food, which I ignored, and then I just harvested some of my crops that were ready, and then I sold some of those crops, and then I went ahead to go ahead and feed my spirits, and then I went and picked up some more seeds from the general store, and said hi to Cleo, and went and got all the first upgrades for all of my tools purchased as well. And then I went and said hi to Ophelia and Guyana, and then I went ahead and planted the seeds that I had just purchased. and then was working on expanding my farming area as well. And then I decided to go ahead and head on over to another island to continue training my spirits up. And then I noticed there was a brick house, which I hadn't caught, so I went and captured it, and then I decided to go ahead and end the day after that fight. Day 34 started out, and I got a letter from our mom asking me to create a specific concoction. And I just went ahead and started the day out by watering some flowers and then grabbing the resources dropped by my spirits and giving them some food. And then I went and picked up some ore so that I can work on making the alchemy lab. So I went ahead and placed that, and I noticed that I'll need ash before I'll be able to make any concoctions, so I did a quick Google search and found that you need to put wood in the furnace, so I did that, and then went by to say hi to Ophelia and Guyana, and then I went and sold my popsy plants in the cell crate, and then went to another island and did some exploring, and there was a teleport point to another island. So, and I found a dungeon, so I went inside there, and I came across my first fight, realized I was vastly overpowered, and I immediately left. So I just went on over to the tavern to say hi, to Asano and Quill, because I am always forgetting, and then I picked up the ash that I had made, and then I decided to end the day. So day 35 started out, and we got a letter from Guyana requesting me to find her spirit, and then I went ahead and decided to go ahead and feed my spirits, and I collected the resources they dropped, and then I went ahead and headed on over to another island, and then I found the Magic Man's little shack, so I went and said hi to him, and then I started training my spirits up. On the first island, there wasn't a whole lot of spirits, so I was collecting seeds from the various crops on an electric type island, and then decided to go ahead and get some fishing done while I was over there. Unfortunately, it was raining, so there weren't a whole lot of spirits available to fight, so I ended the day pretty early. So day 36 started out, and I got a letter from Zed, and he gave me a new crafting recipe for a new spirit stall, because I had an egg that hatched. And then I just started watering my crops real quick, and then I spotted Quill, so I went and said hi to him before going over to visit Guyana and Ophelia. And then I sold some seeds I had. And then I made the poor choice of trying to ask her out, and I got very rudely rejected. And then I went and sold the fish I caught the other day at the island, and then I continued on with my grind of training my spirits for a few hours, but I ran out of energy for them pretty quickly, so I bowed out and then went over to feed my spirits before spending the rest of my day fishing. And after I did about 8 hours of fishing, I went ahead and sold my fish that I had caught so that I can try and increase my working capital a bit. And then after that, I went ahead and ended the day. So day 37 started out, and I just went ahead and harvested my crops and my flowers, and then took care of the crops that were still growing, and then went off to the general store to pick up some more seeds before I started planting them. And then I went and checked on my spirits and gave them some food. And then I sold some of my extra crops and went and said hi to Ophelia, and Guyana wasn't there, unfortunately, which made me sad. And then I went and placed a storage chest in the spirit barn so I could place the crops I wanted to use as food in there. And then I finished planting the remainder of my seeds I had bought, and then left the island to go and train up my spirits some more. And then I spotted the Magic Man's little hut while I was training, so I went and said hi to him. And then I decided to do one more fight, and then I headed back onto the island for the day. And then I spotted Cleo, so I went and said hi to her real quick. And that's where I decided to end the day. So day 38 started out, and I noticed I had gotten a letter in the mail. So I went and checked that out before going ahead and getting started on harvesting my popsy plant that finally bloomed, and then watered the rest of my crops, and then continued working on optimizing my farming space a bit. And then I went ahead and said hi to Ophelia and Guyana, who was actually in the shop today. And then obviously I had to go and check on my spirits, because if you don't feed them, they will run away. And then I had another moonstone, so I took that to the spring temple. And unbeknownst to me, I would encounter my first like really major boss fight in these temples, and to say I got my ass handed to me would be an understatement. I ended up passing out, and that's when the day ended. So day 39 started out, and I woke up in the Magic Man's hut after passing out from the failed trial attempt the day before. So I teleported back to Moonstone Island and went and said hi to Guyana before tending to my crops. And after I took care of my crops, I went over to the general store, picked up something from the community chest, and said hi to Rowan before purchasing some more seeds. And then I went and said hi to Asano before going to take care of my spirits, and then went ahead and started planting those seeds I bought. And then I was tending to the field after that. And then I spotted Cleo, so I went to say hi to her. And then I decided to finally turn in my recent spirit research to Zed, and then sold some of the items I had received from my spirits, and then purchased some of the seeds that from the general store that grow in the river. And then I decided to go ahead and end the day. So day 40 started out, and I just went ahead and started tending to my crops. And I was really appreciating the upgraded watering can as I was getting through all of these before I went ahead and started taking care of my spirits. And then I was super productive and got my training done pretty quickly, just because I'm really trying to be able to get back to that spring temple soon. And then I decided to do some cleanup around the area where I do my farming and placing some more fences. And then I spotted Guyana, so I went and said hi to her. And that was pretty much all I did for the day. Day 41 ended up being yet another rainy day. So I just went ahead and started feeding my spirits before taking them to an electric type island to train some more. And then I decided to do some fishing in between fighting spirits, and then I found a couple of spirits I wanted to tame, and then I made that the last fight of the day, and then I ended it because I was out of energy for fighting as well. Day 42 started out, and I got a letter from Zed requesting his spirit, and I went ahead and made note of that, and then I got a funny letter from Farah, which reminded me that I really need to spend more time getting to know her, because that was pretty unhinged. And then I went ahead and started watering my crops before heading off to see my spirits and feed them, before getting some training done. And then I ran into the Magic Man, so I went and said hi to him real quick. Then I did another fight before heading back to the island and depositing some extra crops into my storage in the spirit barn, and then selling the fish I had caught the other day. And then I spent the remainder of the day just farming for some resources. So day 43 started out, and I just went ahead and harvested my boatload of crops that I finally finished growing, and then tending to the ones that were still growing, which was mostly just my Zaplants and my Elden Leaf. So, and then I did some more fixing up the farm area to make it look a little more presentable. And I even crafted some cute little stone paths for one of my farming areas. And then just continued placing some more fences to make it look a little bit more thought out in terms of the design. And then I went on over to say hi to Rowan. I was not very good at talking to him this day, but I just picked up some more seeds and then went and said hi to Ophelia and Guyana. And then I went to go and feed my spirits real quick. And then I went to continue on with planting. And then I watered the seeds I had just planted. And I did that for pretty much the rest of the evening. And then I sold some Erden leaves and some stunflowers, and then I went ahead and ended the day. So day 44 started out, and we got a funny letter from the Alchemist Guild reminding us to make sure that our equipment is properly maintained. And then I went about and started taking care of all of my crops, because I went a little overboard with all of them. And then I just fed my spirits, and then I went and spotted Guyana, so I went and said hi to her. And then I continued my training, and I came across a bread mouse, so I went ahead and caught it, and then continued training for a while, and then stopped by the general store, and then did some more socializing around the town. And then I put some items in the chest in the spirit barn, and then I went ahead and ended the day. So day 45 started out, and just got a letter from Guyana, which I ignored, and then went to go and harvest some of my crops before tending to my fields. And then I sold some excess seeds that I had, and then I went ahead and fed my spirits. And then I went over to say hi to Ophelia and Guyana real quick, and then I headed off to go and train my spirits up a bit. And I also caught a bitty bolt, which I added to my party. And then I headed back to the island, and I sold some crops, and then I ended the day. So day 46 started out, and I got a letter from Cleo letting me know about an upcoming event. And then I went ahead and took care of my crops, and then I went over to the general store and picked up some items from the community chest, and then spotted Ophelia, so I said hi to her, and then said hi to Rowan as well, since I was over there. And then purchased some more flowers. And then I went ahead and planted them and watered them before I went over to the spirit barn to feed my spirits. And then I went over to a water island and picked up a talisman. And then I headed over to the electric island to train my spirits up a little bit. And then I spotted Waldo, so I went and said hi to him. Then continued my training before heading back over to the conservatory to say hi to Guyana. And then I headed back over to the house, and I ended the day. So day 47 started out, and I spotted Paolo, so I went and said hi to them before taking care of my crops. And then I went on over to feed my spirits real quick. And then I spotted Quill, so I went and said hi to him before popping on over to Zed's so I could turn in my spirit research. And then I decided to swap out a bitty bolt and put him into my barn. And then I swapped out Vanilla for that bitty bolt that I had just picked up from the research center. And then trained up my spirits for a little bit before heading on back and ending the day. So day 48 started out with me just watering my crops as per the usual, and then I went and fed my spirits real quick before saying hi to Ophelia and Guyana. And then I found a moonstone at the statue, so I picked that up and put it into my storage chest. And then spotted Quill, so needed to chat him up. And then continued doing some more training. And then decided to nickname my bitty bolt Macaron, after my favorite type of cookie. And then I went and saw Waldo, who was having some sort of traumatic episode revisitation. And then I decided to finally place my plant in my house, and then I decided to go ahead and end the day. So day 49 started out, and I got a letter from Asano requesting a spirit, and then I decided to go ahead and water my crops before feeding my spirits. And then there was an event over by Tobin's hut in the evening, so I just needed to make sure I made it back in time for that. And I trained a little bit, and then I headed back on over to the island, and there ended up being some seeds there, and then I headed on over to see the event with the spirits all migrating over the water, and then after that the day ended. So day 50 started out, and I got a letter from Zed giving me a new crafting recipe, and then I went to the community chest and picked up some items before saying hi to Rowan, and then I went and took care of my crops real quick before feeding my spirits. And then I did some training with them, and then after I trained them for a little bit, I headed back on over to the island and said hi to Paulo and Guyana and Ophelia, and then I decided to go ahead and end the day. So I started day 51 out by watering my crops before I headed on over to my spirit barn to feed them. Then I decided to get some exploring different islands done today, and I actually ended up finding the first moonstone of the season, which was super exciting. And then I spotted the magic man's hut, so I went and said hi to him before I continued on exploring. Ended up on a way more powerful electric island, and then said hi to a few of the villagers around town before I continued exploring. And I did some training while I was out and ended up finding another talisman, which I grabbed. And then I spotted Cleo on my way back to the house, so I went and said hi to her, and after that I just decided to end the day. So day 52 started out, and I just went ahead and watered my crops and harvested my stunflowers, and then I sold some of my Erdon leaves and my stunflowers as well in my sell crate before heading on over to say hi to Ophelia and Guyana, and then I headed on off to get some island exploration done, and I came across a poison island, so I gathered some of the crops over there, and I had a very, very painful fight trying to train up with some spirits, and then I came across the Fall Temple. I left that alone because that area is way too overpowered, and I came across a fire island that I would have absolutely gotten slaughtered in, so I left there. Then when I head back to Moonstone Island, I came across Cleo, so I went said hi to her before heading back on over to the conservatory to sell the seeds I had found. And then I went ahead and ended the day. So day 53 started out, and I was just taking care of my crops real quick, and then I headed on over to feed my spirits, and then I was doing some more island exploration in this day, and obviously because I was doing exploration I ran into some spirits, so I did some training as well. And then I came across the magic man's hut, so went and chatted him up for a little bit, and then I came across the summer temple. I didn't end up doing anything there, but it was nice I found out where it was, and then I headed on back to Moonstone Island and picked up some flame root seeds from the statue, and then I headed back to the house and I ended the day. So day 54 started out, and got a letter in the mail from our dad, and then I just headed on over to start taking care of my crops, and then I went and fed my spirits before getting started on my alchemistry potion for that quest. And that took a while for it to finish manufacturing, so I went ahead and said hi to Ophelia and Guyana real quick, and then I asked her out on a date, which she said yes, which made me really happy. And then I went and said hi to Quill, and then went and sold some spirit resources and turned in my spirit research, and then the concoction finished, so I sold that, and then did some training with my spirits, spotted the magic man's hut, so I said hi to him before heading on back home. And then I decided to go ahead and end the day. So day 55 started out, and I got a letter from our mom with a recipe for a cauldron. Then I just went ahead and harvested the last of my crops for the season. And then I decided to make another concoction. And I used an Elden leaf and a stunflower this time. And then I fed my spirits before getting some training done. And then when I got back to the island, I picked up a concoction from the statue before heading over to Paulo's and saying hi to him, and then picking up a random crafting recipe Then I was farming for some wood real quick until I ran out of energy. Then I went and said hi to Cleo and Farah, as well as Rowan. And then I picked up a talisman and had the date with Guyana, which was very entertaining, and then the day ended. So day 56 started out, and I got a letter from Quill, which wasn't anything super important, so I just went and fed my spirits, and then continued with training them up, and then ran into the magic man, so said hi to him real quick, and then continued on with the grind. And then I headed back on over to the island and talked to Cleo and spotted a Zed, so I said hi to him, and then continued on with farming resources until I ran out of energy and ended the day. So day 57 started out, and I finally got around to placing my chest, and then I went around and started grabbing some of the new forageables for this season, and then redid one of my planting areas so that I could actually have it fenced in. And then went and said hi to Rowan at the general store and picked up some seeds. And then went to see Ophelia and Guyana and got a new quest, and then asked Guyana out on a date. And then the statue had some new seeds, so I grabbed those before heading back over to the farm to plant the seeds I had bought. And then I went and fed my spirits, and then placed a moongrass stall, and then went to my sell crate and sold some seeds I had before ending the day. So day 58 started out, and I got a letter from Mom asking me to make an abundance potion using the cauldron for Dad, but I didn't have a cauldron, so I just went ahead and started watering my crops. And then I went over to feed my spirits, and I discovered you could feed them fiber instead of crops, so I fed them that. And then went over to the conservatory to say hi to Ophelia, and then spotted Farah, so said hi to her. And then the statue had some seeds, so I grabbed those, and then headed back on over to the conservatory to sell them. And then spotted Guyana, so chatted her up for a bit, and then went over to an electric island to harvest some seeds, and got some training done while I was over there. And then after I got into my last fight, I decided to head back to the island, and then said hi to Cleo, and then sold some more seeds to the conservatory, and then I ended the day. So day 59 started out, and I just went ahead and started watering my crops, and then I headed on over and fed some fiber to my spirits, and then continued with training them up. I was pretty happy with how Macaron was progressing through that, and after I trained for a little bit, I headed back on over to Moonstone Island and started farming for wood, and then I spotted Zed, so I said hi to him until it was time for my date with Guyana. It was pretty sweet, pretty cute, and then the day ended. So day 60 started out, and I just started watering my crops as per the usual, and then I fed some fiber to my spirits again. And then I found a mine I hadn't been into, and then I got attacked by some spirits, so I fought them, and then opened my first chest in that mine, and then continued farming for some resources, and got into some more fights along the way, and one of the monsters actually dropped a moonstone, which was a huge surprise. And then I got a talisman from a water island, and spotted the magic man, so chatted him up, and then I headed back home and ended the day. So day 61 started out, and I got a letter from Waldo that was pretty funny, and then I just started taking care of my crops for the day. And then after I did that, I talked to Ophelia and Guyana real quick before heading on over to feed my spirits. And then I got some training done over on a nearby electric island, and then I spotted Waldo, so I went and said hi to him, and then I headed back home and ended the day. So day 62 started out, and I just went ahead and got started taking care of all of the crops I had, which I realized at this point was probably a bit excessive and not great for my stamina. and my little spirit kept on getting in the way as I was trying to water, which was annoying. And then I headed on over to feed my spirits. And then I headed back on over to the same electric type island as the day before and got some training done. And then after a while, I headed back on home and headed back to the conservatory and said hi to Ophelia and Guyana before I visiting Paulo and picking up a new crafting recipe for a fire resistance potion. And then said hello to a few of the other townsfolk, and I even found a couple of moonstones in the community chest when I went to say hi to Rowan. And then I sold some spirit resources to Zed, and then I ended the day. So day 63 started out, and I crafted a new spirit nest, and then I went ahead and placed an electric spirit egg into my barn, and then fed my spirits. And then I went over to a poison type island and picked up some seeds and caught my first poison spirit, a shrubben, and then an emo shroom as well. And then I headed on back to Moonstone Islands before I lose any more stamina and made some moonstone ingo to end the day. So day 64 started out with me harvesting my flag flowers because I planted way too many of them. And then I just ended up watering my crazy amount of crops. And then I went and fed my spirits, including that shrubben I just caught. And then I picked up the moonstone and go that I made the night before, and then went to visit Ophelia and Guyana as per the usual. And then picked up a meditate talisman and did some island exploration and found a moonstone, so I picked that up. And coincidentally was on one of the same islands as Waldo, so I said hi to him, and then picked up another talisman, and eventually came across a dungeon that was very overpowered, so I immediately left. And then I headed back on over to Moonstone Island, and I spotted Cleo, so I went and said hi, and then stopped by Paulo's shop and picked up another crafting recipe before ending the day. So day 65 started out, and I just went ahead and harvested my fuzzballs that finished growing, and then I planted some more crops in the area with my sprinkler, and then watered the remainder of my crops, and then headed on over to feed my spirits, and then found another meditate talisman. And then I went and trained on that electric type island for a while, and found a moonstone in one of the fights before heading back home, and then got some specter flower seeds from the statue, so I sold those to Ophelia. And then went and said hi to Rowan real quick, and then turned into some more spirit research for some extra cash. And then spotted Guyana, so said hi to her, and then I ended the day. So day 66 started out, and I just started watering my crops, and then some of my applums finished growing, so I harvested them. And then I headed on over to feed my spirits real quick, and then I spotted Waldo on a nearby island, so I went and said hi to him. And then I spotted a dungeon, so I went ahead and entered there. It wasn't a crazy difficult island or dungeon, but I got some chests, so I got some nice resources from there. And the boss fight wasn't terribly difficult, so I finished that up pretty quickly and got another memory shard. And then obviously I found an ando tree, which increased my stamina, which I was really excited about. And this ended up being a psychic storm island, so I caught my very first psychic spirit before turning in my shard to Waldo and heading back on home. Then I spotted Guyana at the end of the night, so I went and said hi to her, and then I ended the day. So day 67 started out, and I just went ahead and harvested my flag flowers that finished growing, and then tended to the rest of my crops. And then I went into the medallion to get Macaron to stop following me so he wouldn't get in the way while I was watering. And then I headed on over to feed my spirits, and then headed over to the conservatory to talk to Guyana and sell some extra seeds I had. And then I went and said hi to Farah, and then got my scythe upgraded. And then I headed over to a fire island to harvest some crops, And then I headed back home and moved one of my spirits to the moon grass stall, and then I ended the day. So day 68 started out, and I just fed my spirits and then hurried on along to that electric island I've pretty much lived at for the past several seasons, and got some training done before I found Waldo, so I went and said hi to him before heading back at it with the training. Until I ran low on energy from the electricity zapping me, and then I headed home and I spotted Cleo, so I said hi to her, and then I ended the day. So day 69 started out, and I had my fuzzball seeds fully grown, so I harvested them, and then I went ahead and watered the rest of my crops, and then I fed my shrubben some actual food in hopes that it will make him drop some resources pretty quickly, and then I headed back over to the electric island to train up a bit until yet again the electricity zapped me clear of energy, and then I went ahead and headed home before I passed out, and then I went ahead and ended the day. So day 70 started out, and I got a letter from Cleo asking for her spirit, and she was asking for a dark spirit, which I still hadn't found that island at this point. So I just went ahead and harvested some crops and then watered the ones that were still growing before I picked up my first poison drop from my poison spirit and then fed the rest of my spirits. And then I grabbed my Moonstone Ego because I had enough to craft my cauldron. And then I went and talked to a few people around town, and then I headed back on over to the electric island to train up a bit, and then once I finished there, I headed back home and sold some of my extra crops and seeds in my sell crate, and then I ended the day. So day 71 started out, and I just went ahead and started harvesting my crops. Then I went and said hi to Ophelia real quick. And then I went and headed over to the carpenter shop to grab my crafting recipe for the day. And then the community chest had some danglers, so I grabbed those before saying hi to Rowan. And then turned in some more spirit research to Zed. And then went ahead and fed my spirits. And then spotted the magic man on a nearby island, so I said hi to him. And then did some resource farming for some rocks while leveling up my spirits until I ran low on energy, and then I headed back home, and then I went ahead and ended the day. So day 72 started out, and I got a letter from Zed thanking me for finding my first psychic spirit, and he gave me a moonstone tracker. And then I went ahead and started taking care of my crops before I headed over to feed my spirits. And then I headed over to the conservatory and I said hi to Ophelia, and then stopped by the carpenter shop to say hi to Paolo, and then to grab the crafting recipe for the day before making my rounds to socialize with some of the other townsfolk. And then I went and saw Zed, and he gave me a quest to find some dark spirits, even though I have yet to find any. Find that island yet. And then I went over to the electric type island I've been on to train, and I wasn't paying attention, and I ended up passing out. And that's how the day ended. So day 73 started out with me waking up in the magic man's house, and then I decided to do some training while I was over there, and went into the mine on that island and did some resource farming, and picked up a couple of chests while I was over there, and got a recipe for a really pretty chair. And then I decided to go ahead and head back to the island, and then some of my flag flowers were done growing, as well as some of my squish crops. So I went and harvested those and watered, and then fed my spirits before heading over to Paolo's shop for yet another recipe, and then did some socializing around the town. And then I put some moonstones into my furnace to get some and go, and then said hi to Tobin before I headed back to the farm to end my day. So day 74 started out, and I got a letter from Osino letting me know that a food critic was coming into town. And then I went ahead and started taking care of my crops. And then I went and fed my spirits real quick before going over to pick up my crafting recipe from Paolo, and then continued on with the training And while I was doing that, I spotted Waldo, so I went and said hi to him, and then continued on with training up my spirits for a while. And then I ran low on energy, so I headed back to the island and went and socialized with a bunch of the townsfolk, and then sold some of my extra crops and picked up the Moonstone Ingo I had made the other day, and then I headed back to the house and ended the day. So day 75 was another sunny day, so I went ahead and started watering my crops, and then I went ahead and I fed my spirits, and then I spotted Cleo, so I went and said hi to her before continuing my rounds with talking to some of the other townsfolk and picking up my crafting recipe from Paulo as well. And then I went ahead and went into a nearby island and entered the mine to farm for some rock resources, as well as get some chests to further my collection of the recipes that I need. And I ended up finding a chimney spirit, which I hadn't caught before, so I tamed them and then continued on in the mine, and I ended up finding a moonstone on that island, so I grabbed that, and then I headed back to Moonstone Island and ended my day. So day 76 ended up being yet another sunny day, so I went and harvested my crops yet again. My applums finished growing, which I was happy to see. And then I went ahead and continued watering my crops and then fed my spirits. Then did my daily ritual of picking up the daily crafting recipe, and then found a talisman, so I grabbed a meditate one, and then was farming for some rock resources around the island, and I came across yet another mine, so I went in there to continue trying to collect some more recipes, and I actually ended up finding a moonstone in one of those chests, which was a nice surprise. And the island that the mine was on ended up having being a spirit storm, so I got into some quick training sessions with my spirits and found Waldo to say hi, and then captured a few more psychic spirits to add to my collection. And I headed back on over to Moonstone Island and ended my day. So day 77 started out, and it was a rainy day, so I just went ahead and harvested my mini crops that finished growing, and then spotted Guyana, so I went and said hi to her, and then continued making my rounds to talking to some of the other townsfolk before putting a moonstone in my furnace to make some Ingo, and then selling some of my extra crops and gems before feeding my spirits for the day. And then I went to a nearby island and went into the dungeon, and then I was reminded that there was a festival. This was a very, very easy dungeon, and I actually caught my first hollow at this dungeon, which was super exciting. And then I fought the guardian spirit. Took like 2 minutes because it was so low level, so I got another memory shard and then found another ando tree, and then that island also had a mine, so I went and continued mining away to try and get some chests. And then I discovered I could not participate in the festival because I didn't have a dish. So I just went ahead and made my greenhouse and placed it. And then spotted Tobin at the very end of the night, so I said hi to him. And then I went ahead and ended my day. So day 78 started out, and I just went ahead and started watering my crops, and then I picked up the Moonstone Ingo I made the day prior, and then I started making my rounds, talking to some of the townsfolk, and then headed over to Paulo's shop to pick up the daily random crafting recipe, and then I went ahead and fed my spirits, and then I went to a nearby island and found a meditate talisman. Then I spotted Waldo, so I went and said hi to him, and then I gave him the memory shard I had gotten the day prior. And then I continued on going into a mine to obtain a chest, and then continued training my spirits up. And I did that until I ran low on stamina, and then I headed back to the island and sold some of the extra seeds that I didn't need and placed a really cute table I bought for Paulo, and then went and visited Rowan, and then I headed back to the house and ended my day. So day 79, I got a really, really cute letter from Tobin, which made me really happy. Then I went ahead and started harvesting my flag flowers. Then I sold some of them in my cell crate before saying hi to Quill. And then I went to pick up my crafting recipe from Paolo and finally got the abundance potion recipe, so I went and made that and sold it in my cell crate to get that quest taken care of before feeding my spirits. And then I went and trained them up for a little bit, and then I spotted Waldo, so obviously I said hi to him. And I stayed there until I ran kind of low on energy and headed back to Moonstone Island, where I spotted Cleo hanging out in the rain, so I went and said hi to her. And then I headed back to the house and ended my day. So day 80 started out, and we got a letter from our mom who gave us a recipe for a crafting bin as thanks for the abundance potion. Then I went ahead and started watering my crops before feeding my spirits. And then I went over to the conservatory to say hi to Ophelia and Guyana, and then said hi to Paulo. And then I decided to make yet another attempt at facing the Earth Temple. Or the Spring Temple, I should say, and I actually won. I was really surprised because last time I got KO'd really fast, so I got the Earth Seal, which was the first of the season temples that I have found. And then I went to a nearby Electric Island and continued training up my spirits, and went into a nearby dungeon to collect some more chests. And then, much to my surprise, that island ended up being a Spirit Storm island. And so I caught another psychic spirit, and then I headed back to Moonstone Island and ended my day. So day 81 started out, and it was raining yet again, so I just spent my time harvesting my immense amount of crops that I had finished growing, and then sold some of my crops in my cell crate before heading over to say hi to Guyana at the conservatory. And then I went ahead and fed my spirits, and then went over to Paulo's shop before heading over to the Summer Temple to try and see how far I could get. And I got flippers so that I could navigate, and then I didn't have everything I needed, so I just headed back to Moonstone Island and ended my day. So day 82 started out with me watering my crops real quick before heading on over to feed my spirits as per the usual. And then I headed over to go and say hi to Paulo and pick up my daily craft. And then I saw Cleo, so I went and said hi to her and continued making my rounds, talking to some of the other folks around town. And then I headed over to a water island to catch the jewelfish needed for the Summer Temple before heading back over to say hi to Rowan. And I crafted the lantern, which I also needed for the Summer Temple. And on my way back over there, I ran into Tobin and Guyana and Ophelia, so I said hi to them as well before dropping off the lantern and the jewelfish. And I got into the first fight over there and didn't bring a moonstone, so I just headed back on over to Moonstone Island and ended my day. So day 83 started out, and we got a letter in the mail from our mom asking to make a new concoction with 12 power as the stats, but no other stat boosts. And so I promptly went to Google to try and figure that out. And then I realized it was a crop I do not have planted, so I went over to Rowan's shop to buy some power fertilizer and purchase some electrocone seeds before heading over to the conservatory to say hi to Ophelia and Guyana. And then I went and harvested some flag flowers, and then went and planted those seeds, and then went off to watering all of my crops that were still growing. And then I went off to feed my spirits, and then went and picked up my crafting recipe for the day, and then continued making my rounds talking to some of the other townsfolk. Then I spotted Waldo on a neighboring island, so I went and said hi to him. And then I continued training up my spirits for a while, and then I headed back home once it got late and ended my day. So day 84 started out, and it was another rainy day, so I harvested some crops outside and then took care of my crops in the greenhouse before heading over to feed my spirits. Then I made my rounds talking to some of the townsfolk to get their friendship up. And then I spotted Guyana in her swimsuit for the first time, which was really cool. And then I went to a nearby island and used a teleport point to access a dungeon, which was a little difficult, but I ended up winning, so I got the memory shards to give to Waldo, and then got a couple of chests as a souvenir. And I ended up finding a moonstone on that island as well as a tattle, which was like a frog little looking spirit, and a bird brain spirit, which was wearing a pretty funny hat. And then after that, I decided to go ahead and head back to Moonstone Island and end my day. So day 85 started out, and we got a letter from Ophelia asking to bringing her a ice spirit, and then I went ahead and started cleaning up the fall crops that had withered, and then I spotted Quill, so I went and said hi to him to try and get that friendship up. And then I stopped by Rowan's shop to pick up some winter seeds to grow, and then I realized that the ground was frozen, so I couldn't plant them outside, so I went and planted them in my greenhouse. Then I went and watered all the crops that I had purchased, and then I went off to go and feed my spirits. Then I decided to go and say hi to Ophelia and Guyana, who gave me another seed collecting quest. Then I went and said hi to Farah, and then collected some spirit research from Zed. And then I found a study talisman on a nearby island, so I went and grabbed that. And then I tamed a Bonkwin spirit before saying hi to Waldo and giving him the memory shard I found the other day. And then I found the first moonstone of the season. Then I headed off to a nearby poison island and went into a dungeon and caught a new spirit and beat the boss pretty quickly. And obviously found the little Ando tree. And it was pretty late when I finished up in there, so I just headed back to Moonstone Island and ended my day. So day 86 started out, and I just decided to go ahead and start watering my crops in the greenhouse. And then once I did that, I decided to go ahead and feed my spirits before heading on over to the conservatory to say hi to Ophelia. And then I went ahead and made my rounds around town, talking to some of the other villagers to get their friendship up. And then I put some moonstones into my furnace to make moonstone and go, before heading back over to the summer temple to have a crack at the boss fight. This was a lot easier than I thought it would be. I thought I was gonna get KO'd like immediately, but honestly it went okay. It was about as difficult as the spring temple was. And then I ended up getting my water seal, and then I turned in the memory shard I had found last time to Waldo. And then I decided to head on back to Moonstone Island, where I spotted Zed, so I said hi to him. And then went and talked to Asano because I realized I had barely talked to her. Then Might and Go finished crafting, so I grabbed that, and then I headed back to the house to end my day. So day 87 started out, and I just went ahead and started watering my crops in the greenhouse. And then I headed off to go and feed my spirits. And then I found a moonstone on a couple different islands. And then after I finished searching for moonstones, I headed back to Moonstone Island, said hi to Rowan, and then went to go and pick up the daily crafting recipe. And then continued making my way, socializing with some of the townsfolk. And then I dropped off the moonstones into my furnace to make more Ingo. And then it was pretty late at that point, so I went ahead and ended the day. So day 88 started out, and I just went ahead and picked up my moonstone Ingo that finished manufacturing in the furnace, and then made some iron Ingo in the furnace as well. And then I went ahead and started watering my crops in my greenhouse before I headed over to go and feed my spirits for the day. And then I went and picked up my crafting recipe from Paolo's shop, and then made my way to talk to some of the other townsfolk. And then I went over to sell some of my spirit resources to Zed before purchasing some more seeds from Rowan. Then I went ahead and planted them in the greenhouse. And then I went to a nearby island and I found a meditate talisman, so I went and grabbed that. And then I caught a whistler, which was a little penguin with a a snowboard, which is really cute. And then I continued trying to train up my spirits while I was out. And then I decided to head back to Moonstone Island, and then I ended my day. So day 89 started out with me yet again watering my crops in my greenhouse. And then I went and fed my spirits. And then after that, I decided to go over to the conservatory to say hi to Ophelia. And then I picked up my new crafting recipe from Paulo before heading over to say hi to Tobin, because I hadn't talked to him in a while. And then I did some farming for some fiber resources, so I had enough food for my spirits. And then I collected the iron ingot that was in my furnace, and then I made my very own glider, which has been a long time coming. And it was kind of late after I did all that, so I went ahead and ended the day. So day 90 started out, and I went back into my greenhouse to get my crops all watered before I went over to go and feed my spirits for the day. And then I decided to bring that new glider to use. Took a little getting used to, though. It was definitely a lot different than the broom. And then I went on a bunch of different islands, including a fire island that it was way too overpowered for me, and found a moonstone. And then I went and said hi to Tobin once I got back to Moonstone Island, and then stopped by the tavern and said hi to Cleo and Farah as well. And then I sold some extra plants and trees that I had in my inventory, and then I went ahead and ended the day. So day 91 started out, and I went ahead and watered my crops in my greenhouse. And then I went over to go and feed my spirits. And then I spotted Quill, so I went and said hi to him. And then continued making my rounds, talking to the other townsfolk in town. And then I headed over to a nearby island and went into a little dungeon, and I trained up my spirits a little bit while I was in there. Not that there was much to train up. This was not a hard dungeon at all. But I did find a moonstone while I was in there, so that was a win. And the guardian in this dungeon was super easy as well, so it was over within a couple minutes. But I got a memory shard out of that, so there was at least that win. And then I went and interacted with the Ando tree to increase my stamina. And then I found a Yeeti that wasn't a boss, so I caught them. And then I went to a nearby fire island where I was overpowered yet again, so I just went ahead and headed back home. And then I ended my day. So on day 92, I got a letter from Rowan asking me to give him a spirit. He wasn't picky, but I didn't have time for that, so I just went ahead and started watering my crops in my greenhouse, as per the usual, before heading over to the conservatory to say hi to my favorite girls. And then I sold some extra seeds I had, and then I spotted Quill at the beach, so I went and said hi to him, and accidentally gave him a hated gift, so that was not great. And then I was collecting more fiber and rocks for my inventory, and I ended up finding the moonstone on this area, which I've been trying to find for ages. And then I was running a little bit lower on stamina, so I went into the hot springs to heal up a little bit. And then I spotted Cleo, so I went and said hi to her. And then I realized I had not fed my spirits yet, so I went and fed them. And then it was kind of late in the day, but I decided to go over to another island, and then I spotted Waldo, so obviously I had to say hello and give him the memory shard I had found. And then on another island I found another moonstone. And then caught a spirit I didn't have before heading over into the dungeon. And then found an icy, which was like a ice cream cone spirit, so I caught them before in the dungeon fighting another guardian and getting another memory shard. And then I turned that into Waldo again, and then I headed back to Moonstone Island where I spotted Zed, so I said hi to him before ending my day. So day 93 started out with me making the concoction I needed for my quest, and then I went ahead and sold it to get that quest out of the way. And then I went ahead and watered my crops in my greenhouse, and then I went ahead and fed my spirits, and then went and talked to Ophelia, and then stopped by Tobin's shop to say hi to him before heading over to pick up my random crafting recipe from Paulo, and then continued talking to some of the other villagers as well as turned in my research to Zed before heading off to a nearby poison island to do some moonstone hunting, and then continued just exploring other islands a little bit before it got pretty late, so I headed back to the house, sold some extra resources I had before ending my day. Day 94 started out and got a letter from our mom thanking us for the concoction and sending us a recipe for a luck potion. And then I went ahead and watered my crops in my greenhouse before heading on over to go and feed my spirits. And then I continued on with some more island exploration and encountered a dungeon so that I could get some more items. And I found the Guardian pretty quickly and ended the fight pretty quickly. But I got a memory shard and then found an ando tree. And then at the end of my exploration, I found another moonstone. And then after a while, it got pretty late, so I headed back to the house right before I was about to pass out and ended my day. So day 95 started out with me watering my crops in my greenhouse. And then I headed on over to go ahead and feed my spirits and pick up the spirit resources they dropped before picking up my crafting recipe from Paulo and making my way to talk to some of the other villagers around town. And I picked up a iron ingot from the community chest in the general store before continuing my rounds talking to people and then turning in some more research to Zed as well. And then I continued on with some more island exploration and found another moonstone to end the day. So day 96 started out and I crafted a moonstone bracelet. And then I went ahead with watering and gathering my crops in my greenhouse. And then I went ahead and fed my spirits for the day before picking up my crafting recipe from Paulo as well. And then I went ahead and spotted Cleo, so I said hi to her before making my rounds talking to some of the other villagers. And then I continued on with my island exploration as well and turned in the items for the poison or fall temple and noticed that they were very overpowered, so I immediately left. And then I continued doing some island exploration on some safer areas, and I pretty much ended up doing that for the remainder of the game day. And then once I ran low on stamina, I landed on a fire island and I spotted Waldo's hut, so I went and said hi to him and to escape the fire damage. And then I ended up giving him the memory shard I had gotten the day before heading back to Moonstone Island. And I headed over into the bar and found a very drunk Guyana and said hi to Tobin before I ended the game day. So day 97 started out and I just went ahead and took care of my crops in my greenhouse and then moved some of my items into my storage chest before heading over to Paulo's shop to pick up my crafting recipe. And then I started farming for some wood resources so I could upgrade to the west wing of my house. And then I continued farming for some wood resources for the next upgrade as well. And then I realized I hadn't fed my spirits, so I went and fed them and picked up their spirit resources they dropped before heading off to do some island exploration and picking up a meditate talisman. Then I went ahead and continued training up my spirits, and then I spotted Waldo, so I went and said hi to him, and then it was kind of late, so I headed back to Moonstone Island and ended my day. So day 98 started out with us getting a letter from our mom for a rather difficult concoction test, which sent me promptly to Reddit to try and figure out what it was for. And then I went ahead and took care of my crops in my greenhouse before visiting my spirits to feed them and pick up the resources they dropped overnight. And then I spotted Tobin while I was in town, so I went and said hi to him before heading off to go and train up my spirits a little bit on a nearby island. I wasn't encountering a lot of spirits, so I used that opportunity to try and gather some more wood until I ran a little low on stamina. So I headed back to Moonstone Island, and then I spotted Paulo, so I went and said hi to him. And then I headed back to the house to go ahead and end my day. So day 99 started out, and I just went ahead and started watering my crops in the greenhouse before heading into town, and I spotted Quills, so I went and said hi to him before heading into the general store to pick up some seeds and fertilizer. And then I went into my spirit barn and fed my spirits before heading over to a nearby poison island to pick up some flake flower seeds. And I did some training while I was over there before heading back to Moonstone Island and I grabbed some dark matter from the statue before selling my seeds to the conservatory. And I spotted Cleo, so I went and said hi to her before planting my seeds I had just got. And then I went over to Zed and turned in my spirit research and sold the spirit resource I picked up from the statue. Then I went and said hi to Paulo, and then I headed back to the house to end the day. So the very final day of the challenge finally came, and we got a sweet letter from our mom about it almost being a full year of being away. Then I headed off to go and feed my spirits before heading into the greenhouse to water my crops before saying hi to Paulo and Tobin. And then I went on to a nearby island and grabbed a meditate talisman. And then I spotted Waldo, so I went and said hi to him. And then I went into another dungeon and found the guardian pretty quickly. And then got another memory shard for Waldo. And then it was pretty late by the time I finished up in the dungeon, so I headed back to Moonstone Island and said hi to Farah before I ended the day.